BR rated. So I just thought we would go with everything is clothed, but like I said, traditionally figure drawing is done nude, and the reason for that is for, you know, so we can see the whole body, the anatomy, without any interruptions of the clothing. For this course, for tonight, we're just going to kind of like imagine through the clothes. Like I said, I do teach clothed figure drawing as well for students who are aged 18 and younger for obvious reasons. So these, all of the poses you'll see tonight are clothed. Scantily clad, I will admit, but clothed nonetheless. Okay. So that being said, I'm going to play this video, and what's going to happen is we're going to see the model, and there's going to be a timer on the screen as well. We're going to have 1 minute, 1 minute. So for those of you who may have never have done figure drawing or maybe have done it, 1 minute seems like impossibly short. How could I possibly do a drawing in 1 minute? And then by the fifth one, you'll be saying like, oh, I'm already done. So halfway through, you'll feel like you're finished with the drawing. So it's going to go very quickly. And what'll happen is there'll be a little bell, and then the model pose will just automatically change, and we're going to do 5 of these through this video. Okay, does anybody have any questions for me? I'm moving, like I said, I'm moving quickly because the drawing is the best part. Okay, all right, so we'll start this video. If everybody can see my screen, if you can't, please let Ed or I know, but otherwise we're going to start this video and we're just going to draw. Here we go. Okay. So as I go through this course tonight, I will be sharing lots more tips, but this is really just an opportunity for everybody to just kind of do what they feel here. Try to capture as much of the drawing as you can on your paper. If possible, try to capture the entire figure. That's a fun challenge that I like to have my students try to make happen. So we're not really worried too much about proportion at this point. We're really just looking for capturing the feeling of that pose. And at the end of this class, we're going to have 30 minutes to review, 30 minutes to review drawings and look at each other's work and sort of see what worked and what didn't. Okay, there you go. So you can just start with a clean sheet of paper. Or if you're doing smaller drawings on a small piece of paper, that's fine too. You can
Denise,
stay with one. Yeah.
Are we supposed to be able to see your paper? Because I see the video and I see you, but I don't see your paper.
Oh, my paper is, there's another participant screen that you'll see. If you look in the gallery view, you can see that you will be able to see my paper. You can see you might see my hands moving around. So yeah, there are a few screens happening at once. It's multimedia.
Oh, there we go. Okay, I think Ed
You got
must have
me?
made a change there.
Yeah, I spotlighted it now. Sorry about
Great,
that.
thanks, Ed.
So my personal style is I tend to do these kind of swirling gestures. There's lots of different ways to do them, but you will see that I start with the line of action, and we'll start again. For those of you now who can see my paper, when I talk about the line of action, you can see like through this figure, it might be through her head, through her torso, down to her leg, something like that. I'll sort of set that up just roughly. And then I'm kind of come in with, and we're going to go into this specifics in just a minute, but a shoulder line, right? Torso, a pelvis line here to indicate her hip bones. And I like to sort of think of the rib cage and the pelvis working together as two solid masses. And then there's the limbs kind of just fall into place at that point. So we're really just capturing as much of this as we can. Like I said, this is really just a fun opportunity exercise for now. Okay. So here I might come through her head, torso, to a hip line there. We can see a really exaggerated shift in the hip down through that extended leg, and then her standing leg. Sort of set the drawing up. And at this point, I'm just really hoping that everybody's experiencing the speed of gesture drawing and kind of keeping it really loose. There's no right or wrong way to do this. And there's no, like, figure drawing is really just about capturing as much of the pose as you can, without a lot of self-criticism. That's really important, I think, in figure drawing. It's really important to just not be too judgmental, especially if you're new to art and to figure drawing in general. So if you're watching me draw, you might see like I'm setting up sort of masses. I sort of see the torso as a mass, the angle of that knee down through the hip, and then the transition through the pelvis into the torso. That's what I'm working on right now. And then the arm, elbow, up to that, back up to that knee. And I find I spend a lot of time moving around the whole drawing, the whole figure. I don't stay in one place very much. And then I capture as much as I can. Okay, so that was 5. Hopefully you got a couple of figure drawings done, a couple of little gestures. Like I said, we're really just at this point, just looking at the figure and just sort of capturing some of the movement of the body. But what I think is also really important, and I would like to try as well, is something that, so the key to figure drawing that we were kind of going after with gesture in a really loose way is the observation of the figure. So I find it really important that it's not just about, oh, I see a person and they're sitting, I'm just going to go ahead and draw that. But it's the specifics, it's the skillful observation, right? It's the specifics of how is one limb look compared to another? Where are the cross points? Where is the transitions? And we're going to go through this in the longer demo that I have set up in a minute. But again, just for sort of for fun, a fun way to sort of loosen up, but really become attuned to what we're looking at is an exercise called the blind contour. And so I thought we would give that a shot. I'm going to show you what that might look like. Whoops, I just started that video. Okay, so a blind contour, they look like this. They're going to be really, really crazy. And I don't expect you to be able to make this drawing any other way than how we're about to do it, which is also kind of the cool part about blind contour, something I really love about it. I think the drawings are always really exciting. My students who are under 18 who I teach always think that they're like horrible. And I say, no, 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 they're so exciting because they have an energy that cannot be captured any other way. So expect, if you've never done this before, your drawings are going to look something like this. And we're going to use these 2 images. Can everybody see the 2 figures on the screen? I know that they are nude here, but I have all the parts covered, very carefully selected. So what I'd like for you to do is take whatever tool you feel most comfortable with. This is going to be a 5-minute drawing, and you can use, like I said, any tool you like. I'd like you to select from these 2 poses the one that you prefer, and then this is going to be an exercise in the honor system. The goal here is to only look at the image and not to look at your paper, okay? So I'd like for you to, and I'll do a quick demo if you can see my paper. So as I'm only looking at the image, I will start sort of at the top of the head. And the goal here is that my pencil and my eye are moving across the figure at the same speed. So I might capture the hair, and I'm not looking at the paper. So I know that things aren't really going to be lined up. And I'm doing this very quickly, just as a quick demo, but you will find that you might want to go a little bit slower. So over the hands, up to that finger. And I'm looking for, I like to talk about this with my students as an opportunity. Think of it like a car driving down a road. Okay, so I'm following the roads and then the intersections, and I'm tracking along across that finger, through the thumb. I find my way back here to the other arm, up through the neck, and I'm going to try to find a pathway through the whole body. Now, as I get up here, I know that I've done the hands. I might just have to find a way down here to get to the bottom of her torso. Okay, so it's already looking crazy, but I'm going to set a timer. If you've been practicing already, that's fine, but now we're going to do it for real. We're going to set a timer for 5 minutes. And what I'd like for you to do is really focus. It's really fun if you try to focus your attention really on that figure. And if you see an angle that moves upward, sorry, Ed, go ahead.
Denise, I was going to ask, so do you want us to not lift our pencil from the paper?
That's, yes, good call. Thanks, Ed. Yes, that's ideal. And the reason for that is if you don't lift your pencil from the paper, it's a little bit easier to track. So it's a little bit easy. Since you're not going to be looking at the paper, it's like you can see my drawing. If I'm here and then I want to go down here to the feet, right? It's more difficult to sort of track where we're at. So ideally, if I'm here on the hair, I want to find a roadway, right? In these terms that will help take me down there to get down to the feet. Okay. Again, I just did this very quickly, but we're going to do it now together, and I'm going to do it as well. If you'd like to try this, it's going to create a drawing that's really unique and special. And we'll do like 3 to 5 minutes. We'll see how it goes here. Let's see where we're at in time. Okay, cool. Everything's good. So let's go 3 to 5 minutes here. I'm going to set the timer. We don't have a timer on the screen, so you're just going to have to, it's an honor system for me too, that we're going the right amount of time. So I'm going to set a timer right now. Here we go. And we will go for 5 minutes. All right. So no looking at your paper. We're only looking at the images. Pick the one that kind of speaks to you and kind of go for it. Try to stay out of the way so you can kind of see what I'm doing if you want to. So as my eyes track across the figure, my pencil is moving in the direction that my eyes are going, up and to the left, and then around, down. Okay, I got to a point where I'm just like, that's it, I'm done. And you may get to that point if you feel like you kind of covered all your surface area and you have nothing left to give. You may say you're done. That's why I said we kind of see how it goes. I'll give everybody a couple more minutes. But the slower that you track, the longer obviously the drawing takes.
Yeah, Denise, I had that trouble where I just ran out of lines. I didn't have anything else to trace.
Yeah, and that happens, right? And that definitely happens. So okay, so I'm just gonna stop the timer now. So hopefully everybody got something. And like I said, I think that the power of this exercise, and I think this is something that I like to just do occasionally, like even I was traveling over the weekend and I did this in the airport. The power of this exercise is when we look at the figure as humans, we're so familiar with the body that we immediately go into autopilot. We immediately say like, oh, I understand that pose. That's a woman. She's on a stool. Her knees are up. I got this. I can just draw it. And what we tend to do as artists is we look away from the piece, from the photo, or from the model in this case. We look away and we end up drawing a lot of from memory. So we stop observing and we start drawing just thoughts of, I get that, this is a hand, but what I'd like to kind of review now, and we're gonna move on to a longer drawing here, is going after like how we start a figure drawing and what we are looking for specifically in the drawings themselves. So let's going from start to finish. And I think that working intuitively this way with a blind contour is really fun because it takes us outside of our self-doubt. It takes us outside of like questioning how perfect is it? Is it great? Is it not great? And it forces us to really look at our subject much more closely than we might if we are just kind of working from life or even from a photograph. We kind of get into a mode of like, oh, that's okay, I can kind of wing it. And I think that the important thing for figure drawing is really honing your skill of not winging it and honing the skill of really trying to capture what you see or what you feel you see, right? So we're gonna go through that. So this is the image, and I think that so here's what's gonna happen. I'm sharing an image right now. Ed has shared that image with you in the chat. And what I'd like to do is let's just see how we are on time. Take about 20 minutes to draw this figure. Now, in a normal figure drawing class, it's very rare that we would take 20 minutes, but I'm gonna kind of draw and talk. And that'll give you, if you're not comfortable with like this, like, oh, let's do a drawing in 5 minutes feeling, this will give you an opportunity to kind of like dig in deep to this drawing, which I think will be really great. But I'd like to, so you can maybe have the drawing on your computer so you can see that drawing, or sorry, that photograph, this woman in her underwear there with her mask.
Denise, I just put the image in the chat so folks can download it if they like.
Okay, so if you can, you might want to figure out your own, what works best for you for your setup based on whatever device you might be using. But ultimately, a good way to approach this would be to have that image of the model, the figure that we're going to draw, I'm going to be drawing, in a place where you can see it and maybe also be able to see the drawing that I'm doing at the same time. So I'm also going to be sharing my PowerPoint, so you might be referring back to that too from time to time. So if you're seeing my PowerPoint shared screen right now, you can see that the image that we're going to be drawing has a grid over it. And the reason for that is because the very, very, very first step when we're doing a figure drawing is to and I'm actually going to change my paper, I realized, okay. The very first step is to sort of conceive the composition. And that can be very challenging, especially when you have a three-dimensional human figure standing in front of you and you need to get that person onto the paper. For new artists, it can be very difficult. Now, it's when we draw from a photograph like this, or when we do life drawing even online, which through the pandemic, I've done a lot of online figure drawing, it's much easier to conceive that composition because we do what's called flattening the plane. So when I talk about flattening the plane, excuse me, what I mean is the idea of this woman standing in front of us versus on this flat monitor is very different. We see in stereo as humans, we can see around that figure. It's what makes drawing from life more challenging. It's what I love about figure drawing from life, is that challenge to capture that three-dimensional form and to translate the three-dimensional form to the paper. So when we have a photo or a photo reference, or we're drawing from an online model, that concept of flattening the plane has been done for us. Here it is, it's flat. We're transferring now a 2D image to a 2D piece of paper, even though she's a three-dimensional figure inside that image, right? So I like to tell people to think about going back to our roots when we were all children artists, and we may have done this idea of gridding the paper, right, to help us to conceive proportion. It helped what that exercise did was help us get everything in the right place. How tall is this section of the body versus another section? But in this case, I think what helps is to help us visualize this two-dimensional image onto our paper. So I just kind of wanted to show like in my mind, I told Ed that this is like looking inside of my mind. When I first look at a figure, I immediately kind of see this grid and this translation from the 3-dimensional to the 2-dimensional for my paper. So I start there in just a conceptual way. And then the next thing I do is exactly what we just practiced with our gesture, which is to begin, and I'm going to go ahead and start, put this together. So I'm going to draw this, and I'm going to draw and talk, and you guys are welcome to draw and listen, or just watch, or whatever combination of those that you prefer. But I'm going to walk you through my process, and you're welcome to ask questions. Feel free to just jump in there. So for this figure, you can see the very first things I'm thinking about is the very first line I'm looking at is that green line. It's sort of the whole gesture of the pose. And by conceiving that line onto my paper, and I kind of make a mark at the top, that's the top of my head. And then I travel down here, and I'm going to try to, with hand-to-eye coordination and very careful observation, I'm going to try to capture that same curve on my paper to try to set myself up. Okay, this is our gesture line. It's our line of action. I know it might be hard to see, but that's what I'm working on here, is to capture that curve and to fill my paper. So for those of you who may not be able to see, like I have a line, my green line starts up here and it ends down here at the bottom of the page. By starting there, everything else is going to fill in between that top and bottom part. So I know now that I'm conceiving the composition. I'm putting her left and right, putting her in there so I can fill the page up. And everything's going to fit now because I sort of set myself up that way. Okay, so I've got that green line. The next thing I'm going to look at is, I always find myself, instead of going right to the limbs, I look for anatomical landmarks. So when we talk about anatomical landmarks, there's a bunch of them. And if you have the syllabus that I had sent out for this workshop, there's a whole list of them there. We're just going to go through them as I kind of come to them in my drawing. But the first one is, I almost always go right to a shoulder line. So you can see that top orange line on the presentation image, if you're looking at that. And it's generally straight. It looks to me like it's dropping a little bit on her left shoulder, our right. So I'll look at that line and sort of try to find where it crosses that green line and sort of reference that, put that in there. And then the next one I'll go for is that other orange line, which is the hip line. So when I'm talking about a hip line, I'm really talking about these anatomical landmarks that happen on our body, which are it's called the ASIS, which is the top of the pelvis, the iliac crest. And it's the bumps that you can see right there at that orange line on this image, where the hip and the leg kind of come together. So I'm trying to draw that angle, and I'm trying to be as true to what I'm seeing as possible. So it's not just any angle, it's very specific. And I can even use my pencil here. I'm trying to get it on camera so you can see, like, I might use my pencil to gauge what the angle of that hip is. Is it like this? Is it like this? It's certainly not straight. So I'm gauging that, and I'm using my pencil tool to help me. Okay. So this is what in my mind, as I'm working, I'm setting myself up here for a drawing, right? So I'm putting these kind of initial marks down. I like to think of them as sort of the foundation. If we're building a building, it's the very first foundation. It's our concrete slab. I'm putting that down, and I'm starting to identify certain points, sort of the width of the shoulder here. I'll sort of look at the limb now. I'm going to kind of guesstimate where those are going to go based on what I'm seeing here. And once I sort of have a general, and here's that extended front leg, and it's going to just fit here on my page. So by setting my drawing up before I get too far into it, I know that I'm going to get this whole figure on this page. I'm going to get that foot in there, and this back foot is going to be right in here somewhere. So you can see that I kind of have this very weird looking thing, and I like these construction lines in my drawing. It's a big part of like how I build a drawing. So I like to have that in there as sort of my reference point. From here is where I'll start to really kind of go after each of the general shapes using anatomical landmarks as my sort of guide. So I might start with her head. You can see that blue line in the center of her face, right? And the green line that I was using as my starting point is also the center line of her body. So that's a very important aspect of this. And it's setting up the, so when I talk again about anatomical landmarks, we're looking for specifically the key to the whole figure is the torso. Okay, so that's why I say when I go after those first, it's rib cage, spinal column, pelvis. If we can get the gesture of those in place, the limbs will just sort of follow. So that's one of the reasons why I kind of go after the clavicle or the shoulder line first, which would be our clavicle, our collarbone. That's what we call sort of the top of the shoulder girdle. That sets me up for how is that rib cage situated. And so I will actually, a lot of times I will actually draw in sort of a rib cage. And I don't know if you can see what I'm on my paper, but I'm actually sort of drawing in the shape of a rib cage, a volume there. The rib cage and the pelvis are two solid masses that are working in conjunction with one another, with the soft belly in the middle. And so you can see in this particular pose, she's extended on one side and she's sort of crushed in on the other side. That's because the pelvis and the rib cage are sort of coming together like a hinge on that side. So I'm going after that fold. I'm going to look for that fold in her torso, and I'm going to align the body parts on the center line. And again, I have actually drawn in essentially a rib cage here on my page, and I have the belly down to the abdomen, and the pelvis is going to be down in here. So you can see now that if you can, hopefully you can see my drawing. I can maybe make it a little closer. What I've got now is gesture with some anatomy starting to come on top. So I approach figure drawing in layers. I find myself going over and over the drawing multiple times. Not everybody does it that way. Again, that's my personal approach. And that's what this class is about. I'm just kidding. But if you find yourself drawing it a different way, that's totally accurate as well. But the important thing now here is where we kind of, no matter how we sort of start to set up a drawing as individuals, as artists, I think what becomes really important here is this idea of, again, when we're talking about observation. So there are a lot of details that I look for at this point in my drawing. One of them, if you can see the PowerPoint that I'm working on, one of them is going to be these ideas of negative spaces. Another one is dropping a plumb line. I'm going to talk about that in a second too. So alignment of the figure. And we looked at that original image with the grid over the figure. So visually trying to make some alignments now at this point. So for example, if we're looking at this, her ear here, I can see is directly over her crotch right here, right? And directly over that knee. So if I can visualize that plumb line in my mind as I'm looking at the model, I can literally lay that out in my drawing here, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to just put that line in here. And then I know that in my drawing right now, you can see my knee is way too far over. I can't see if I'm getting that on camera, but so I'm going to make some adjustments now based on that plumb line that drops straight down the center of her body to make sure that the navel is to the left of that plumb line. The knee should be on it. Okay. And I'm not really too focused on proportion at this point. I'm kind of using my intuition on proportion. But if it starts to feel out of proportion, you can use a simple measuring device, which is in this, if we look at the gridded figure, it's very easy because we can look at that grid and we can say like, oh, I see that the head is the same size as her lower leg, for example. But in figure drawing, when we're drawing from life, we can use our pencil. I'm sure you've seen artists hold their pencil up with their thumb. And what we're doing at that point is we're measuring, if you've never done that before, is with my one eye closed, I could be measuring the size of the model's head and using that as a gauge to say, okay, well, her head and her torso or the width of her shoulders, for example, are the same. So I can start to use some cheats to help me get proportion lined in. But another way to approach that, if we're going to go with a more intuitive and expressive approach to proportion, is to be really decisive about where things intersect. Okay, so again, on a flat image, it's much easier than if we're sitting in front of a human, because we can kind of like move around, the model moves a little bit, things change and shift. But when we're looking at a still image, it's another reason why I wanted to do a still image for this workshop, is when we're looking at the still image, let's say we look at the chin in this model, in this pose, the chin, where the chin and the trapezius, her shoulder, intersect is very specific. It's not an accident, right? The chin and the shoulder are there because her chin is dropped down, and the angle of the face compared to the shoulder is very specific. And we're going to try to really capture that relationship. Now, I also use a lot of anatomy, and I know that not everybody knows all of the anatomy in the human figure, but of course, the more anatomy you know, the better. A little bit of anatomy goes a long way, understanding a little bit of the anatomy. So we talk about, I'm talking about the rib cage, trochanter, which is the insertion point of the leg into our hip, where the hip and the pelvis come, or the top of our femur and our pelvis come together. On a lot of times on men, we'll see that as a little protrusion, or on thinner women. In this gal here, we can see it right there in the crease of her underwear, right where that is happening. So we also see the center line through her torso above her navel. That dark shadow is the rib cage, where the rib cage is separated. So that's what's creating that kind of concavity there. And we can represent that with a shadow. And we can also follow the shadow line of her torso as it rolls around behind us. Again, in this image, it's very easy to see that shadow. And I'm making comparisons visually as I go here with distances. So I'm being very specific. What is the distance of the navel to her left side of her abdomen versus her navel to the right side? And you can very easily see that the distance there is much larger on the one side than it is the other. So I want to try to represent that as accurately as possible. Again, using all these sort of devices, I'm sort of building up where everything aligns. Now, in addition to the vertical plumb line that we looked at, I'm also looking at horizontal relationships. And with this gridded version up here, I almost feel like I'm cheating, because it really gives me so much information. It shows me that the hip and the elbow are very closely aligned. That happens just, you can see that horizontal line happens just below the navel. So we have an elbow that's happening in very close horizontal proximity to the navel. So in our drawings, we want to try to get that there. Now, a lot of times, especially when you're new to drawing the figure, you might say, oh, I drew this, and then I realized that that's way too far over. And I think what typically happens a lot of times, human nature as artists, is we just say like, okay, well, I'm just going to live with that, and I'm not going to make a change. I really think it's important to change it. So if you find that you're getting out there, you're getting along in your drawing, and something's not quite right, and I'm going to use my drawing here as a perfect example, it's okay to make changes as we go along the way. The first sort of bricks that we put down on our building were just ideas, just thoughts. And I'm making observations, and I'm rethinking as I go. I had a professor at RISD who once told me that if I wasn't using my eraser as much as my pencil, then I wasn't really making observation. I wasn't really looking. So the idea of changing, and I don't use my eraser very often at all, because I really love the idea of this building of the drawing, and a lot of my personal work that you can see on my website really shows this layering of thought. And I love when there's an arm in one place and then it gets moved somewhere else. And the idea of that thought being part of my drawings is part of my personal style and what I love about drawing and figure drawing. So I'll just go ahead and just move things around the whole way long. So what's happening now in my drawing as I'm talking and working is I'm realizing all my good intentions of keeping my both feet up on the paper kind of blew out of the water a little bit, because now the proportion is guiding me to say, okay, those feet are not going to make it. And if you can see my drawing, you can see I still have my gesture set up nicely, but I'm making some modifications here as I built this torso. Everything is kind of coming into alignment through, and I, again, almost feel like I'm cheating because I have this gridded version up. We should really go back to the, okay. Oops. Okay. All right. So, so the next sort of part of this, and I want to kind of get to this now, is the idea of dimensionality. So we're talking about the gesture, we're talking about laying out the figure, we're talking about aligning the body parts, we're talking about observations of relationships, right? How close is one thing to another? Also kind of touched on the idea of negative space. So we're looking at, going back to that, right? We can see like the shape of the negative space inside of her torso and arm. It's very distinctive. If your shape on your drawing doesn't really look like that, then you probably need to rethink a little bit and make some changes. The size of that first lobe intersected with the curvature of her hip, we want to try to capture that. So those are the things that are going on in my mind, right? Again, I'm trying to represent for you my whole process from start to finish. And that's a big part of it, is I will go back and forth between the inside and the outside of the figure, the contour edge line to the negative space. And then as I sort of start to build the figure, where I'm heading now is into this idea of building the form through value. So I will actually go after, and about this point in my drawing, I will start to look at the shapes that the shadows create on the figure. Okay, also looking for the dimensionality of the figure. So one thing that we can use to our advantage here is, because we have a clothed figure, is the wrapping of the bra and the underwear around the torso. As much as we want to believe that that bra line is just a straight line, it is not, right? And so we reevaluate that. It's curved. It's curved, and it's curved very specifically, showing us the form, the shape of her body, okay? So we're going to try to represent that as closely as we can, and we can use that bra to actually break up the forms, like we were talking about negative spaces. I see the arm, the skin of the arm, relationship with the bra top, as sort of a negative space. Same thing with the space that's of her chest. But I'm going to now look for the shapes that make up the form, the shadows. So right here under her breast, there's one. There's a very distinctive shape that runs down the left side of the photograph of her torso. And again, we may want to say like, oh, it's just a straight line there, but it's not. It's undulating over the muscles of her abdomen. So trying to get that shape in there, the shadow shape, with those undulations will give us some more specific information about the anatomy that's happening below the surface. Okay, and same thing with the oblique in her hip, the hip that's in the light, where her the arm, her left side. We see an oblique there, right? The shape of the musculature coming off of the rib cage and connecting it to the pelvis, that shadow. And then we have a crush here on her left to indicate that torso is bending, gives us that sort of shift. And then, of course, like if we look at the shadow on her back arm, her right, there's a very severe, like almost knife edge shape to that shadow right on her wrist. And then you can see the back of her wrist. And again, I'm just sort of talking you through all this because I think that the key here is observation, right? If I can see this stuff, then you should be able, it's easier to get it on your paper and draw it. I think for me, I think the hardest part is having, when I'm teaching, is for artists to see the parts of the shapes of the shadows, and to release ourselves from what we think we see. And I know it's difficult to say like, oh, draw exactly what you see and only draw what you see. But I think it is easy to think, okay, what is the shape of the light that's falling on her right hand shoulder? It's like the shape of an almond. So if I can try to capture that shape in my drawing, I know I'm on the right track, right? We're talking about the bright light that's happening inside of her bra strap, or sorry, outside of her bra strap, falling right on her lit up shoulder there. And I can use the lines of the garments to help me here as well. I'm going across here, and you can see that I spend a lot of time moving back and forth. So I jump around. I think it's very important to build up our drawings holistically rather than try to draw the face, then draw the arm. Take each piece, sort of building it like a sandcastle. You can't really just build the top, then build the bottom, then build the side. We have to build the center, build a little bit bigger, build the towers, and the details come, of course, last. So let me bring this a little closer so maybe you can see. Here's how mine's coming. And I do want to spend time at the end to share our drawings, so that I think we're good on time. So we're going to keep drawing. Does anybody have any questions about stuff I'm talking about, or want to like say something or ask, or I'm happy to help guide you if you're like totally lost, moderately lost, not lost, whatever.
Denise, what did you call the lines that were sort of green and orange? What were those lines called?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So the green line here, I'm showing it again now. The green line is really how I start the drawing from the very beginning. And I call it the line of action. I mean, a lot of artists do. It's the main gesture line, the main line through the figure. And a lot of times it will be representative of what the spine is doing, right? Because again, we starting with the torso being the penultimate center of the figure. It's really, everything is based on that. And although I can't see her spine, of course, in this pose, I can imagine that would be the shape of her spine if I was like using my X-ray vision. And it's because we know certain parts of her anatomy are going to follow in line with her spine, which is obviously our clavicle notch here at the base of our neck is really in line with our 7th vertebrae at the back of our spine. So those two are pretty much in alignment with one another. So right where that green line and the orange line cross, we know that that's spinal. Same thing with like the center line of the body kind of transitions through to her spine. So I go after that first, Ed, as sort of the line of action, the main gesture. The orange lines I use as my, those are anatomical landmarks, using the sort of the ends of the clavicle, which are the tips of the shoulders, because I find that it sets up the action of the pose. So you can see, like, if I'm way tipped over, that angle becomes more extreme. You get the feeling of the rotation, the twist, the bend of the torso, that kind of thing. So I cite that line to see, oh, getting thunder outside. I cite that line to see what is it in relation, how does it relate to a horizontal, straight horizontal line? And like in this case, it's definitely not perpendicular with, say, the top of the paper or the ground line there, the horizon line behind her. It's dropping a little bit. And that little drop gives us that just that extra little tip in her shoulder that I think makes this pose really, sort of special. And as I'm saying that, I'm looking at my drawing and I'm realizing, like, my shoulders feel too even. So for those of you who might be able to see here, like, I'm actually rethinking that shoulder line. So I've moved it from here down to here, because that changes the feeling of the pose. And as humans, maybe not even as artists, but as humans, I can look at that drawing before I make that change and say, it doesn't feel the same. My drawing doesn't feel like she's leaning into that shoulder. Why does it not feel like that to me? I mean, when I look at this drawing, it's those subtle changes, those subtle, really distinctive observations that help to bring our drawing from it's close to it's a little bit closer to it's a little bit closer to it's really accurate now. And it really feels like the pose that we're drawing. So did that answer your question, Ed?
Yes,
Okay, perfect.
the reason I asked is when I did that line, it really threw me off for the rest of the drawing because I've never used it before. But I could see how it could be really helpful.
The red line or the green?
The green.
Okay, so with me, you know, so I can see, and I can totally see how it can throw you off. So it's a great point to bring up. For me, like when I set that line up on my drawing, I'm almost starting to look at that line, and just like we looked at the gridded portion of the drawing, like I'm sort of setting it up for the crosses, where things are crossing. So like how far along that line, how far down is the shoulder happening? How far down is the pelvic happening? And I'm setting up these little intersections along that line, right? There's these little pathways. So I see the red line crosses the green line at about, let's say, you know, what is that, like a quarter or a fifth of that drawing, right? And again, we can measure that, we can use that. So I'm looking for the intersections, not just in the action line or the spinal line or the center line, right? This green line happens to also be the center line of her body. So the center line, the shoulder line crosses that center line. Again, we can also use the breasts as a really good crossing, right? How much farther down from that first red line to like essentially where her breasts are, down to the next sort of crossing, which I would think would be like where the bottom of the rib cage happens. I didn't put that on this drawing, but it's right at that fold in the side, in her side. So I'm sort of dividing it up, right? And that's how I'm building my proportion, is through that method. And the intuition of feeling the distances. But like I said, you can use this measuring technique, and a lot of artists do it and will do it throughout their whole drawing process. Sometimes I find that it ends up, the drawings become a little bit mechanical. So I'm not, like, I like artists to use it, but not over rely on it, if that makes sense. Help you to guide you to put the proportions generally in the right place, but without becoming sort of the end all be all, this measuring idea. Because I do think that we as humans become, have a keen awareness of where things are sort of not feeling and looking quite right. It's called the uncanny valley in digital arts. And it's when things look so close to reality, but you know that they're not real, that it's the uncanniness of how accurate can it be. It's a very strange thing. But when we're doing figure drawing, I think that we as humans I can look at a, you know, I feel like we self-evaluate our drawings no matter what level we're at, based on, well, does that look accurate? Because our ability to see accuracy, you know, we know the human body, we know what it looks like, so we can self-evaluate. That's why I always try to start with, like, don't be overly self-critical, because we'll self-evaluate this and be like, oh, that doesn't look like, her arm is too long, or her head is too big, or her, you know, keep the list going. Evaluate that. And if you notice that kind of thing in your drawing, the best thing to do is just change it, right? If you say like, oh, I like this drawing, except I think her head is way too big. If you're at a point early, you know, you're pretty early in the drawing, you can just make that change. You're not locked in. And I think that that's really pretty important as well. Does anybody else have any thoughts or questions?
And feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to make any comments.
So I'm gonna give us another, like, maybe, let's go for 5 more minutes. Just trying to math is always my downfall, to be honest with you. Let's see. Yeah, 5 more minutes. That'll make it 7:20, and then what we can do is, if you'd like to share your drawings, we can kind of like do a little chat about your work, and I'll show mine, and but let's just go for 5 more minutes here. So I think a really important part of, as you start to dial in your figure, things like what I hear all the time is, oh, I can't draw faces, or I can't draw hands, or, you know, they're daunting. So what's important is to kind of look at each shape, right? I like to, instead of drawing what I think I know when it comes to a face, is really evaluate the shape and the angle of the eyebrow, the direction of the nose, and sort of give in to my idea that I know what a face looks like, and instead really try to focus on what's making up the shapes of that face and what makes it unique. So I'm working on the face right now, and one big part of this is this dark shadow that happens underneath her jawline. It helps to tell us that this head is tipped down. And again, I'm looking very carefully at the shape of that jawline, where and how it intersects with the ear, and then that long neck muscle, which is my favorite muscle in the whole body. It's called the sternocleidomastoid, that long dark muscle in her neck. And that really helps us to connect the head to the torso. When that muscle is extended, as it is here in this image, it gives us an indication of rotation. So if you could try to capture the shape of, and what tells us about that muscle, there are 2 shadows there that we're really looking at. It's the shadow under the jawline. Then we have the light, where the light is hitting her right on the muscle. So that you might find yourself leaving that part sort of open, and then jump over to the other shadow on the back, which is almost like an arrowhead shape, right? If you can kind of get those working in conjunction with each other, all of a sudden what you have is this muscular buildup happening. And so I like to break the anatomy down that way as I'm going along. I also have a clavicle here that I'm going after. The shape of the bra top rolling over her shoulder on both sides. And another big part of this drawing that I didn't talk about yet, but I'm going to, in the last couple minutes here, I'm just going to mention is, you know, the anatomy of what's happening in her leg. I hadn't really gotten down to the leg yet, so I hadn't really spoken about it. But what happens in the anatomy of the leg, and I have this, if you can see the presentation now, you can see the anatomy of the leg. I thought that this pose was really cool and really interesting because of how much of the muscle we can see of the quadricep, which is the leg muscle that's sort of bulging above her knee. And what you can see in this, in the presentation, are that our muscles, they like wrap around each other. They're intertwined in a way that's really unique and makes the human body amazing in so many ways. So this idea of the muscles wrapping and inserting into the joints, like where you can see that muscle kind of intersecting with her kneecap, capturing those kinds of transitions is what takes our drawing from being a person to, I think, to an actual like legitimate sort of figure drawing. You can see the little muscle right above her kneecap kind of bulging from the way she's standing. And it sort of makes a little V shape, shadow shape, triangular shape on the top of her leg above her knee. So I'm going to try to capture that. And then of course the kneecap below that, and the shape of that shadow down her calf. And also the contour edge shape of the calf as it comes down. So, all right, I'm going to go 2 more minutes here. And I did not finish my drawing because I was talking, but hopefully you guys have had some time, you know, listening and drawing. And when we get to a hand, here's a quick tip for hands is, again, I try to really look at the shape of the hand as a mitt. So let's see if you can see my hand, and see right there. Starting it out as a mitt, or as a, in this case, it's almost like maybe a diamond shape, where the thumb is laying, I'm talking about her backhand, not the one holding the mask. It starts out sort of wide at the top, then there's a flat angle along those knuckles. And don't be afraid to use straight lines. I had a student recently tell me that he always draws curves because he doesn't, the body has no straight lines. And although that's true, I do think that we have moments in our anatomy where we get this kind of angularity that I think is important, and a straight line can help to reinforce that. And we can see that right in her hand, right? There's a straight line that sort of comes down from her wrist along the back side of the hand, then from the first knuckle to the second, and then from the second knuckle to the fingertip. And then those fingers sort of disappear right behind the thumb. And even if I just, and I think that what's important with, we talk about hands, is that it really is dependent on how much time you have. Like some people say like, oh, I can never draw a hand, it never looks right. But I do think that a big part of that is, well, how much time did you have to draw? I mean, a hand is a very complicated thing. So if you only have 5 to 10 minutes to draw a hand, if you can really just get even kind of that much information, again, a gesture of a hand, an indication of how the fingers are laying out among each other, the direction of the splits in the fingers. A lot of times when hands, not in this particular pose, but with a hand laying on a leg or something, you might find yourself actually drawing the spaces between the fingers rather than the fingers themselves, because the shadow in between the fingers actually defines the shapes, if that makes sense, right? So again, like I said before, I find myself going between inside, outside, and I try to challenge myself to look at things in a different way than I would if I was just saying like, oh, what color pants does that person have on, right? Where I'm just making an observation, where I say to myself, like, what does it really look like? How do I really see? So when we talk about value here in the last minute, one of the things I'm constantly challenging myself on is if we have a value scale where 0 or 1, let's say, is pure white, and 10 is pure black, I will find myself at this stage of the drawing saying like, well, how do I see that back arm in relationship to that torso? Which is darker, which is lighter? I might say that the torso shadow is on my 1 to 10 scale, and this is me in my head, and I do this constantly as I'm drawing. I'll say, well, that torso is maybe like a 7, but the arm is like an 8 or a 9. It's darker. And I'm making comparisons. So I'm not just making comparisons between relationships, I'm also making comparisons between dark level, the contrast and the value. So you can see like I might even bring this arm darker, and the darker value of that back arm is what helps to push that arm back, right? And the last thing I'm going to say here in my last like 30 seconds that I'm going to give myself to talk, because I could just keep on talking until it's 2 o'clock in the morning, but I will not do that. Another sort of great thing about this pose, another reason I chose this image, is what's happening on this back leg with the shadow of the mask on her leg, right? So in the classes that I teach here at my studio, I have a beginning figure drawing class that starts out, one class is gesture, one class is contour, one class is specifically about proportion. And then the last class we do is about value and the anatomy and the understanding of the shadow and how important the shadow is to our figure drawing. One of the key elements to shadow, or a type of shadow, is the cast shadow. So that back leg, what we're seeing is the mask itself casting a shadow onto that leg. So the shape of that shadow on the leg, which of course is this weird amorphous shape, is giving us information not only about the shape of the leg, but also about the object that's casting the shadow. So it's telling us about the shape. If I look just only at the shadow on the leg, it's telling me not only about the shape of her leg, how it wraps around, you know, the form of her leg, the value, the contour and the shape. It's also giving me information about the object that's putting that shadow on the leg. You can see the little bits of the leaves of the mask on the shadow as little like fingers. So again, if you can kind of get that into the drawing, again, depending on time, you have a kind of a two for win there. It tells me the shape of the leg and the shape of the object that cast the shadow. A lot of times we'll see cast shadows from hands falling over a body part, and you'll be able to see the shadow of the fingers wrapping around the arm, again, indicating the shape of the fingers, how they were extended or relaxed, and how that falls over the contour of the piece, the body part that it's laying on top of. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of call that good. I was also drawing on toned paper here. And so, you know, one of the things that I find myself doing in the last 30 seconds of almost every drawing is I'll pull out this white charcoal, which I had said I would promise you I would show you. And I actually will come into drawings and draw the lights on, and that's the reason why I'm just going to do this really quickly so you can see. It's one of the reasons why I love using toned paper, because I can then set the value of my paper. If I have a scale from 0 to 10, if I say the value of my paper is about a 3 or a 4 on that scale, then how do I get the 2 and the 1, the whites? I do that with this white pencil. This is, again, my sort of favorite cheating process. I'll go into the figure now in the last seconds of the drawing, and I will find the places where she's the brightest. Where is there the most light? And I'm just doing this really quickly, and I'm going to show you close up so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But so I love the concept. I love the idea. It gets me very excited as an artist. The idea of drawing light to me is like so exciting and fun. So I love doing this on my drawings. And you can see that even with a few pools of light here on this drawing, that I'm starting to get these highlights and brings those pieces to the front. It really brings the shoulder out, the breasts, her hip. I see a lot of light through her abdominal muscles. I would also go after that sternocleidomastoid. It's very bright, so I would give that a little extra so you can kind of see what's happening there. All right, so I think I went over mostly everything I wanted to say. I have, like I said, I could just keep going forever. Get really excited about figure drawing. But I'd love to see your drawings. So we have a few minutes. We have just over 30 minutes, right, Red? Is that right?
Yeah, and so Denise, I think I'm going to stop your share.
Okay,
so
perfect.
We can see.
Yeah.
And then I'll remove your spotlight, and then whoever is showing their art, I'll spotlight their video so we can talk along with it.
Great.
And I'm trying to get set up so I can show you mine, although I'm not very proud of it, but just give me 1 second here. Does anybody else want to share? You can unmute yourself and we'll spotlight your video. Let's see. I guess we have nobody is volunteering right now.
Come
How
on.
about Jeannie? Jeannie, you got to show your.
Here's me. I'm up.
Oh, okay. Who's
how
talking? Sorry.
Oh, there it is. I see
Carly.
Barbara's.
Oh, Barbara. Okay, let me spotlight your video, Barbara. Okay, great.
Oh, great.
Wow.
That's excellent.
It's
That's
not
excellent.
very good.
No, it's beautiful. I really love it. So I think you've done a really, really excellent job with the gesture, right? I really feel the twist in the body and the drop of that shoulder, which I think is really important in this pose. The one thing I would suggest is I think that, and I think this is really common, is a lot of the line weight throughout is pretty similar. So a lot of times I will try to vary my line weight to accommodate like let light pour over. So where we see that sort of protruding hip, we had a lot of light coming over that hip. That line and the one on her torso maybe could have just been like slightly lighter hand to really let that light sort of pour in, if that makes sense. Same thing with the down, the arm that's holding the mask. So I think that you would do really well with like varying the weight, the pressure that you make with that pencil.
Yeah, I regret having started with this pencil instead of starting with some of my lighter ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and that's, I agree. I think that like, that's how I like to approach things too, is to like start with a basic, fundamental like layout, and then kind of build it up over time. But I think that you can do it with the one tool if you're just really sensitive on the earliest marks that you make and go slowly, approach it slowly. I think we tend to look for, drawing an outline, right? As children, we were taught to like use a black Sharpie and draw an outline, draw the lines. And I try to avoid doing that. I try to really just lightly put in those lines and then really work the shadows to help to build the form, if that makes sense. But you have some beautiful shadows in there. The torso shadow is great. The whole chest and the clavicles is really, really nicely done. So, I mean, these are like, these are silly, it's hard when you have, I know I'm working with talented artists here. So the drawing is really, really beautiful. It's really successful.
Yeah. Thanks, Barbara. That was great. And I actually, what I can do with other ones is I can screenshot it and then share that. So you can sort of look at your drawing while we're doing that. And let me just see if I can show Barbara's here. Just give me one moment. Let's see. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, great. It's beautiful. That foot too is so nicely done. It's just so simple, right? It doesn't take too much to really indicate what's happening with the shape of that foot and the top of the foot versus the toes. You captured a lot with a very small amount of detail. And I think that that's really successful, especially when we do figure drawing and we don't have very long periods of time. We don't have 20 minutes or 3 hours to finish drawing. A lot of times we have 5 minutes or 10 minutes to do a drawing. To be able to capture those kinds of subtleties so eloquently, right, so quickly with such little information is really impressive. It's really awesome. It's beautiful.
And it looks like Malia maybe wants to share. You want to share, Malia?
Hi.
Oh, I can see that over your shoulder already. I'm so excited to see it closer. Oh, that's absolutely
Using my
gorgeous.
laptop, so let's see. That's not the thing. That's better, maybe.
Yeah, that's perfect. Right there is perfect. So Malia, this is first of all, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
And this is a perfect example of what I was saying to Barbara, right? Like I think that you have some really awesome variation in your line weight. And I think that really makes this drawing really special. There's a really light touch in that shoulder. And I really think that lets the light kind of pour onto that shoulder, contrasted with like the heavier line weights in the back arm, and the shadow that you have back there really pushes her back. So we really feel that sense of dimensionality and that twist. And what you've done in the torso with the muscles through the torso and the split between the rib cage there, also the knees, it's really excellent. And then I really love too the neck, like I was sort of talking through the shadow, light shadow. You really hit that totally spot on. I think that you have a really fine sense of the value scale that I was talking about as well. This ability to discern the variations, right? Like it's easy to see the ones. I like to, put them in number terms, right? The one, which is the bright light, and the tens, which are the dark, dark shadows. But what happens in the middle is where things become difficult. Is that a 3 or a 4 or a 5 or a 6, right? Like, how do you make those decisions? And I think you have a really strong handle on that, like especially through the torso and through the breasts, also the back leg and the shadow of the mask on the knee. This drawing is really, really excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. I love
I
it.
gotta say, I feel like I got lost right in this back leg and that shadow from the mask. The leg all of a sudden, like everything was matching up, and then all of a sudden the leg was too long right there.
Yeah, and that, listen, that happens. And so, like I said before, like if you're early enough in the drawing, you can catch that kind of stuff and you can kind of make corrections. Like I said, my drawing myself, I thought I was going to get the whole figure on there. I'm so proud of it. And then I have my feet falling off the page. So if you're early enough in the drawing, you can correct things like where you see a misproportion in a leg or something. But I think that when we get into a drawing to a certain point, it's okay to just say like, okay, that leg's just going to be a little bit long. It's okay to use some exaggeration in our work as well. A lot of times I find myself doing exaggeration, especially when I have an over exaggerated pose, like maybe the tip of the shoulder, I may tip it more, right? To really kind of push that feeling. So exaggeration is a part of this as well that I didn't really want to, we had an hour to do like, 5 years of work here, but I really wanted to touch on all these high points. And I think that I tried to make this workshop a little bit more in depth because I know I'm working with artists who have probably worked with the figure in many times before. But so I think that when you find that you are working with something that you may not be exactly what you want, like how do you keep that together? I think that's something maybe we all kind of have come together or have come upon as artists, like you're working on a piece and it's like not exactly right. So how do I make it work? How do I bring it together with the rest of the piece and make it really work out? I think there's a big part of that in figure drawing as well. And a lot of that comes from the fact that we only have such a short amount of time in the figure, drawing the figure, that I often find 3/4 into a drawing, like, oh, that leg's kind of long, but I'm just going to go with it, and make it work.
Thanks. So we have an image from Bryn, but I'm having a little trouble with it, which I'll get to it in just a second. Does anybody else want to share? Let's see. Let's see. I think I've got, well, I'm trying to get to Bryn's here. Just give me 1 second.
So Ed, while you do that here, I'll just share mine too. I don't know if everybody got to see mine. So here, let's take a look at, I'll share, I have to actually see my own thing here. Let's see. Okay, here we go. All right. So, proof I'm putting my, money where my mouth is here, right? Again, this shoulder, we talked about having all the light coming across, and you can see I kind of hit that with a pretty light touch early on and didn't really go back to it. I really wanted to drill down here into the dark to push that side back. But you can see that my personal kind of drawing style is to really have a lot of this construction line in the background. And what I find works for me, and it may not be that everybody kind of likes this look, that sort of starts to, for me, I see that as like the muscularity in the leg, right? I see that those structure lines as sort of the striations of the muscle pulling through. It's sort of the way that the marks are put down kind of help to build the form. Same thing through the torso here. I kept it really sketchy because I was talking and drawing the whole way through, but trying to capture those anatomical moments that we saw in some of the other drawings, Malia, yours in particular, right through the center line and this oblique muscle in here, and the kneecaps, the shadow of the mask. These are the moments that I picked out in this pose that really made the pose important and that made it special, right? The things that I wanted to kind of go after, those shadows, the muscularity, the leg. It's when I saw the image, I was like, oh, I want to draw this because of all of the twisting and anatomy anatomical information that was in that pose. If that makes sense.
Great. Now we do have Malia. So
oh, sweet.
I'm sorry. This is Bryn, actually.
Bryn. Well,
Yes.
great. So Bryn, this is like perfect contour, right? So in the classes that I teach, I do, like I said, I teach gesture and contour. And so contour being like really going after the outline. So you have like this really firm handle on the idea of the concept of the outline, right? So we don't see any shading here, but nonetheless, I see all the shadows because you have them all outlined. So I love this. It's like this really interesting variation on putting in value. You almost don't even need the value, like that shadow along the side of her torso. It's very clear to me that that form is happening even without that shadow sort of being shaded in, if that makes sense. So I love this. I love how you've distilled the shadows down, like I was talking about, into shapes. And the shapes are distinctive enough, so distinctive that they give us the sense of form even without shading through the whole value scale. So I think that's really great. I think one thing that this drawing suffers from is what I sort of was also dealing with in my drawing, which is the legs are a little bit too small, right? They're too short. And what I think happens a lot of times is not only with new artists, but myself as well, we start to do a drawing, and when we get to the bottom of the paper, we're like, oh, I gotta get that foot in there at all costs, like whatever it takes. And a lot of times artists will shrink the lower half of the torso, of the body, the legs in particular, legs and feet, to get them, force them onto that page. So I often tell my students and myself as well, when I'm working on my own drawings, like I strive to get the whole figure on there. But when I know that the figure is going to fall off the page, I just let it go, because I'd rather let it go off the page than compromise the proportion. So if that makes sense. So Bryn, drawing is really beautiful, and every aspect of like the anatomy of the foot and both feet and the knees all look great. It's just the proportion was compromised to sort of force that whole figure to stay on there. I think that if you had let those legs kind of go off the page, and if I kind of like cover the below the knees with my hand, the drawing is like, to me, is a little bit more successful. Because I don't lose the proportion there. Everything else is so beautiful and so on the money. And I love the relationship between the hip and the elbow of the arm that is holding the mask, the shape of the mask. I mean, all of it, it's great. I just kind of wish that the legs were longer, if that makes sense.
Great, thanks, Bryn. I think I'm going to show mine, although I'm really embarrassed about it, Denise. But
no, there is no shame in figure drawing, Ed. You show that drawing.
Okay, here we go. So what threw me off was the green line that we did at the beginning. I think it was green, and I drew that, and then I put that orange line for the hips, and I think I put it down too low, and so that caused the torso to be extended, and then the legs got too short, and it went way off proportion. But
yeah, and so proportion, like it's like, I spend 3 hours on a class in proportion, just on proportion. So I listen, first drawing out of the gate, like you can't expect everything to be proportionally accurate, right? We talked a little bit about measuring, and I'm sure, Ed, that if you had the drawing or the photo with the grid sitting right next to your drawing as you did this, it wouldn't have gotten out of control like that. But what I do think is successful here is I do see that that green line, right? I see that gesture line, that leg and relationship of the head to the torso to the leg is in keeping with the pose, which is great. And I also see the dip in the shoulder. So the shoulder line, hip line, gesture line were successful. Where I think, like you said, where I think you got off is a little bit on these like distances between shoulders and hips to legs. And that's why I think it's important to build the drawing a little bit more slowly. Yeah. And this looks very confident, right? And which is great. Like I love confident illustrations and drawings. I just think that's so awesome when people are like, yes, I'm putting in a line and it's going there. But if you had spent a little bit, like if you would have noticed the extension in that torso earlier had you roughed it in. And you could have corrected that. You could have brought that hip line up just a little bit. I think that you probably got in so deep, and by the time you realized it, you kind of like went gangbusters into putting in those contour lines. And by the time you realize that, you're like, oh, everything now is so dark that I don't want to make any edits. I don't want to
Yeah,
change it.
and what I did is I knew it was off, but I figured I just want to do the shading now because
Right.
I might as well.
Right.
But yeah,
So
I was looking at it, she sort of looks like, yeah, very, very off proportion, but the shading I enjoyed doing even though I knew the drawing was off. So
well, I think that the shading is really successful, even though the proportions are off. And so that I was going to kind of get to that, right? Like the proportions being off doesn't really bother me so much because this isn't really specifically a course about proportions, right? So we can like kind of let that go by the wayside. Yeah, it's easy to say the proportions are off, but look at how much form you were able to achieve with the shading. Now, I think the same kind of comment goes for you as, was it Bryn, the first drawing we looked at? Or I forget now, I'm sorry.
Barbara, I think. It was
Barbara, right, Barbara. Yes, thank you, Barbara. You know, I think that there's a lot of consistency in the line weight. So like, let's look at that back leg, for example, all the way around that back leg is a dark, heavy line. And I think that if you were a little bit more sensitive with your line weight, around that leg, and that's one of those things, it's kind of like riding a bike, it just takes practice to sort of see like, oh, maybe a little bit lighter line here, a little bit heavier line here, lets that light come in. Now, one of the things a mantra I say to myself when I'm working a lot is, I'll actually go across, so we did that blind contour exercise, and it's a perfect way to kind of bring in what I'm going to talk about here. Is we're going along the back of that leg with the blind contour, and you're going along that line. When I'm drawing that, not blind contour, but actually figure drawing, I'll actually look at that and say like, oh, there's light on that leg. There's light on the back of that leg. I can see it. It's bright. So I actually say light in my mind. I mean, I really do this. This is crazy, I realize, but I do it. I'll say to myself like, oh, there's light there. And it's my indication to myself to make the line lighter, a light touch, right? So the brightness light indicates light touch. And then when I see shadow or dark, that I will automatically kind of put a heavier line there. So as the back leg, you know, the line on the bottom where we would have been in shadow, like along the knee side, that would have had a heavier touch, whereas the back of the leg where the light was coming over might have had a lighter sort of mark, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And I see that now looking at the photo of it, that it is a very consistent line all the way around. And
yeah. So again, that's just one of those things that takes practice. I think that's really, really common. Like I said before, because we just kind of go in for the quote outline as, you know, where we go intuitively as artists, because as children, that's what you're trained to do. You draw the outline. So it just takes it's a real subtle variation. It's very small amounts of variation we're talking about here. So that's, I think the challenge is to be sensitive enough to that and really try. And that's why I sort of started this workshop with the idea of this skillful observation, sensitivity of, is that lighter? Is that darker? Should that be light touch? Should that be a dark touch? Before you get into a drawing like this, Ed, where you're like, now everything's all dark lines everywhere. You know what I mean? And then you throw your hands up. But you know, you could go into this, Ed, and erase out some of those lines on the side of her body where the light's coming in. Yeah. And I think it would automatically be more successful. The other thing I want to see from you at some point is, don't make hairy lines, right? So some of these lines are like hairy all the way through. Try to be a little bit more confident and try to put in like these marks that are like longer swooping strokes, soft strokes the whole way through. Think of like C, S, and I lines. So like along the backside of her torso, you almost have an S there, right? From her breast through the waistline, and then it kind of curves back along her hip. If that could be like one soft, continuous S curve rather than this kind of like sketchy line the whole way through, it would lose that kind of hairy appearance, right?
That was really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad. I know I say a lot of things. I'm always guilty of over talking. So
no, it really helped a lot.
Okay, good.
Let's see. Anyone else want to share? Just put your hand up, or
Don't be shy. Everybody's drawings. I'm excited to see them all.
And Denise, I think I'm going to stop the recording now just
Okay.
because we're kind of finishing up.
Yep.
Thanks everybody for joining. Let's see.